Welcome to Eat Well, Travel Better, the Business of Food Travel podcast with Eric Wolf and Ashi Vale, where we help you become a better industry professional by gaining inspiration from some of the world's most successful people in the food and beverage tourism industry. With each episode, we meet these leaders and examine their secrets of success. We reveal the obstacles and challenges they have faced, along with their solutions and triumphs, and give you ideas and inspirations for many of the same business issues that you may be facing as well. And now for today's episode. Welcome. I'm Eric Wolf, and I'll be your host today for episode 38 of Eat Well, Travel Better, the Business of Food Travel podcast. Normally, I would be joined by my co-host Ashi Vale, who was on maternity leave for the next few episodes. Today, we'll be speaking with Rika Nakazawa. Rika is a senior leader, entrepreneur, investor in, and a frequent public speaker on technology-powered business transformation. She is the CEO and founder of Board Seat Meet, a Silicon Valley social impact venture that focuses on diversifying the boardroom by empowering women to build and leverage social capital with modern technology. Trilingual in Japanese, German, and English, Rika grew up in Japan and moved to the U.S. initially to attend Princeton University. She is a technology industry veteran who has worked internationally in senior executive roles in strategy, business development, and marketing with Fortune 500 companies that include NVIDIA, Sony, Accenture, American Express, and also several Silicon Valley startups. Rika is passionate about deepening the intersection of human and digital paradigms through transformational innovation and the pursuit of purpose-driven collaboration. You can learn more about her and her company at boardseatmeet.com. Welcome, Rika.
Hi, Eric. Thank you so much. Good to be here. Thank you for the honor.
Rika, it's great to connect with you again. We've known each other for, about 20 years or so?
Oh, is that in COVID years or non-COVID years?
It's been a while, and it's so nice to connect with you again, to hear your voice again. I feel like it really hasn't been that much time since we were living together in San Francisco. But now we're both pursuing very different paths than the time when we originally met. And we know a little bit about what you do, and you know now what we do. So I think our audience would really love to hear the story of what your connection is with food tourism.
Fundamentally, I grew up in a very multicultural environment, even though I grew up in Tokyo, which Japan is a very homogenous country and society in whole, although that's been diversifying. I grew up in an international environment at the international school in Tokyo. And because of that, we would have family festival every year. And of course, food was a big part of how people enjoyed family festival on a yearly basis. And on the personal level at home, my father is Japanese and my mother is German. And so by default, I always associated food with culture and the way that we celebrate the differences and commonalities within that. And my father was also an international businessman. And so he would always be traveling to different countries and different locations and would often come back with different snacks or different tchotchkes from far off lands at that time that it felt that way. And so it was always something that was an integral part of how I grew up and what I was able to celebrate and enjoy. Now, my father was a much better cook than my mother, so I hope they don't take offense when they listen to this session here with you today. And my father wasn't just about the Japanese food. Since he traveled so much, he was always embracing other cuisines as well. And I think ultimately the relationship that we have with food is around culture, but also how we relate with one another and how we communicate and how we connect, whether that's at the family dinner table or whether that's with our friends over lunch or whether that's in the context of being aware of global influence in different cultures and communities.
So you definitely had a varied background growing up with food and beverages. My gosh, when other Japanese kids were probably eating ramen and Japanese curry, you were probably eating schnitzel and ice cream and what else?
You know, I joke and say that as the food industry has evolved and really found a way to have fusion, right? So you would have Spanish and German fusion or Chinese and Indonesian fusion. German and Japanese fusion cuisine is probably low on the list of what sounds the most appealing because you're not going to have sauerkraut with sashimi, for example, or you might. But yes, definitely grew up with a lot of different fusion and bicultural and tricultural ways that things came together around food.
So from a very early age then, you were definitely understanding what the link was between food and culture. And that's really interesting because that happens to be our mission statement here at the association is preserving and promoting culinary cultures through hospitality and tourism. What was your first trip as a young girl?
My first trip as a young girl overseas was actually to Guam. And I was 3.5 years old, so don't have the most vivid memories of it. I was on a commercial shoot. My mother threw us into modeling when we were little kids, and so I had the chance to be in some sort of kids magazine. So that's the first trip that I took. The second trip that's much more memorable in terms of being older and being able to remember was actually when we moved to the US for a brief period when I was 5 years old. We moved to Scarsdale, New York. And that was my first exposure to Americana. And I remember very much the big part of being in the elementary school system, kindergarten and elementary school, was the lunch boxes. And that's very much something that I think is very American versus other countries.
A 3-year-old model. I don't think I've ever met anyone else who's a 3-year-old model before.
I have pictures of me in, strangely enough, a bikini as a 3.5-year-old on shoot on the beach in Guam.
Oh my goodness. Now we have had another model on the show before, but never a child model. So that's an accomplishment, Rika.
Thank you.
Well, yes, I would agree with you. The American lunchboxes are definitely something unique to American culture. Was it a huge shock for you coming from so you were really bicultural before, more Japanese and German because of your parents, then you came into the United States. Was the food just a complete shocker to you?
Not really. My mother is German. However, she moved to Canada when she was in her late teens, and she speaks 5 languages. And she's also very well traveled herself. And I actually have in my home right now Julia Child cookbook that I think she had even maybe before I was born. And so being exposed to different cuisines was something that was par for the course in my home.
You've experienced a lot of different cuisines and foods. What's your favorite food and what's your least favorite food?
My favorite food is really easy to cook. In fact, you don't cook it. It's sashimi, so raw fish. Japanese style, of course, because you have to be very specific on how you cut the fish for it to be optimal. My least favorite food so far is probably a flash fried scorpion on a stick that I
Mmm,
had when I was in Beijing.
everyone's favorite.
I know.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd ever try that. Or the fried tarantulas in Cambodia. I think I'd pass on those too.
Mm.
Have you ever
It
had
did.
those?
No, no, but I imagine it's a little bit of a similar experience where if you turn off the fact that you're eating an insect, you feel like you're eating a different kind of potato chip, but it's the power of the mind that takes over your taste buds at
Mm.
that point.
Yeah, I don't think I'll ever be able to turn that off. So, were you able to turn it off?
After my first bite, no.
All right, we're not going to ask what happened then, but so let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about you growing up. And I think you were saying that you were kind of a classic overachiever growing up. And tell us a little bit more about that and then your theory about the chaos theory and how that has come into your life.
When I was growing up, I don't know if it was because of my parents or my environment. All I know is I was very driven to get the A grade. I was very driven to get first place in cross country. I was very driven to achieve. And when that initial push and that drive first came into check, I think was when I got to Princeton. So I graduated from the international school at the Sacred Heart in Tokyo, and all the girls in my class, it was an all girls school. We were basically driving towards going to school in Europe or the US. My brother was already in the US. And when I got to Princeton, I think the big moment that had me rethink the motivations for where I was driving my energy was realizing that I had scaled this peak getting into a university. And at that point, nobody was telling me what my next summit was going to be. And so it's much more singular channel, I think, when you're in junior high and high school around what you're supposed to do. And then it almost goes from the 5 channels that you used to have on your TV box when it was black and white TV to when you get to college, it now becomes Netflix, where you have a lot of different options. Nobody's telling you what to do. In some cases, of course, parents are very specific about what they want their kids to do. But in my case, I was really struggling because I had very strong left brain, very strong right brain, and they are often at odds with each other, whether it was my love of statistics and physics or my love of art and English literature. And so one thing that I came in to check around is that life isn't about the destination. Life is really about the journey. And thinking about where I was going to set my sights on next wasn't about the narrative of excelling in and of itself. It was really about, I have this time on earth. I have the great fortune of being equipped with education, being equipped with a phenomenal family, being equipped with friends, and having access to education in the US, which is challenging and perhaps increasingly so. And so where do I want to focus my energy? Where do I want to focus my attention? Because at the end of the day, we all have the same number of hours in the day. We all have certain constraints around how and where we spend our time and our energy. And so what you choose to put your attention to and your focus on is really a trade-off. And you also have to be okay with that trade-off, because I think, especially today, a lot of us suffer FOMO, fear of missing out. So really thinking fundamentally of what do I want to do and why? And really asking the why question is, I think, essential. Because at that point, saying, well, I just want to excel doesn't get you traction. What gets you traction is, why is it that I want to do X? And for me, Princeton was a starting point. But as I advanced through my career, there were much more profound moments of alacrity that I had, where realizing that ultimately it's about making an impact and paying it forward. And part of that realization also had to do with realizing that achievement doesn't have to be the first place trophy that you can get in a sporting event, or an A grade, or being number one on an exam result. It's also realizing the impact of the chaos theory, and this all has to do with the butterfly effect, where if there can be a small butterfly flapping in swings in one part of the world, that can create a tornado on the other side. There are different ways that people have expressed the butterfly effect, but that's simply what it is. And it feels like living in the digital age that we are, compressed significantly by COVID, that a single flap in some respect can be much more amplified than ever and much more profound than ever in influencing bigger outcomes over a much shorter period of time than perhaps conceived when the butterfly effect was first created. And so I think where that plays back to the overachiever paradigm shifts that have happened over my career is realizing that one small thing that you do, even though it might seem small at the time, can have a significant multiplier effect. And so instead of feeling like you have to go for the big bang, realizing that the big bang can be on the other side, and more than likely, it's not just about you. It's about how you can plant that seed that then has reverberations that then get amplified by other people that are working with you towards that. And also where it intersects with timing, where perhaps the impact that you want to have now may not happen from a timing perspective because there are all these other things that need to fall into place. But in 6 months' time, in a year's time, in 10 years' time, those stars align and make that impact happen.
Got leftover, unused and unwanted foreign currency? If you're in the UK, dig it out and visit bidwedge.com. Bidwedge makes it easy to change your unwanted cash currency back into British pounds. Enter the amount into the Bidwedge calculator, see what you'll be paid, post the cash, and watch the money appear in your bank account. It's easy to do. And every transaction is insured. Visit bidwedge.com and make that unwanted foreign currency work for you. Bidwedge.com. Easy to do.
Interesting. So you're an overachiever, and we worked at the both same technology consulting firm in San Francisco, which was intense indeed. But then you started to go down this path of paying it forward, which led to your current role, I think, with Board Seat Meet. Tell us a little bit more about that company because it's a new type of company. It's a new company, a new type of company, and I think it's really starting to address some of the issues that we're seeing take precedent in news today and in society today.
Attended Princeton's Second Women Alumni Conference in 2018. And at that conference, I attended a session about women on corporate boards. And as I sat listening to the three panelists that were seasoned public company board members, there were two things that hit me in those cartoons, like when a piano falls from the sky. It was that kind of impact. Was number one, why it was so much later after having been in senior leader roles. For example, I was a VP at American Express in 2009, 2010, a full 8 years before I attended this conference, that I hadn't thought about corporate governance as something that could be a consideration for my career trajectory. Why did it take so long? How come I didn't have early exposure to the notion of corporate governance? And number two was the theme that I kept hearing from the panelists. There were a few, but one in particular was around the notion of social capital and the access to it. And social capital is fundamentally the warm relationships you cultivate through professional connections in social settings. So for example, on golf courses, in sailing clubs, in cigar rooms, in private clubs. So these moments that I just described, I'm sure you're envisioning a room full of probably white men, because that's typically how socialization has happened within a professional context. And so a lot of the board seats are filled through word of mouth, through referrals and advocacy and sponsorship. And that advocacy and sponsorship happens by virtue of the social capital that you've cultivated with your network. And so as I came out of this conference, and that panel session in particular lingered for a long time. And I've been in technology, as you know, Eric, when you and I were at the startup way back when, decades ago, we were right at that cusp as well. We were at a time when digital transformation wasn't the headliner in capital letters as it has since that time and been growing ever since. I've been in that vernacular ever since that time. Well, even before China.com, I was at Sony Online when we're a small group of people that were trying to help Sony Pictures leverage the power of the internet in the early internet days. Because of my relationship with transformative technology and the application of it in business, and not just for the sake of cool technology, but fundamentally thinking about how technology solves a problem that is languishing and lingering, I thought, okay, there are these great organizations that are doing phenomenal things as it relates to advancing women in leadership. And when I was looking at that across the landscape and I talked to a number of board members, I thought there could be another crack at the bat at this. And that's where Board Seat Meet emerged as a concept where I thought we can leverage the power of modern technology, which is, for example, network orchestration, which is the mechanism that Uber and Airbnb and Upwork and some of these other ventures and companies are doing, is they're leveraging the power of the shortest distance between people through a digital platform and helping them find each other. And without that orchestration, they otherwise wouldn't. What we're doing with Board Seat Meet is we're helping the underrepresented groups. So we started with women, and now we've expanded our remit to address racial equity as well. So it's gender balance and racial equity in the boardroom, and making it much easier for board members today of public companies, private companies, of nonprofits to connect directly with a pipeline of diversity, which has been one of the reasons why board members and boardrooms have said the reason for the lack of diversity is because we just don't have access. So it's a bilateral access. Board members have access to a much more diverse pool, and candidates have access to social capital or the opportunity to cultivate social capital by being able to connect with board members. That's really the simple solution that we've been building, and we're in closed beta at the moment. And we are also rounding out that technology platform with our other aspects of board readiness and board preparedness. And with COVID, what's been interesting is that there's been heightened awareness on what we're doing, and then overlap that with the George Floyd tragedy has also heightened awareness around racial equity and leadership. And so what we're doing right now is very, very relevant for how we manage through this time of crisis. Number one, there's greater attention on the role of the board in helping organizations and enterprises and corporations navigate with resilience through a crisis. For a board to be able to effectively do that, they have to be high performing. We know that diversity leads to high performance, and therefore there's conversation and attention around how do we ensure we have an optimal representative board that's going to help us through this and beyond. So that's number one. And then number two, with the racial equity piece, has been around underrepresented groups isn't just about women in leadership, it's also about people of color. And so that's been something that we've expanded the remit on and has been getting a lot of attention. And the last thing I'll just mention as it relates to this whole notion of social capital, because ultimately it's about access. And we know that that is a key pillar of how people advance and how people make an impact. COVID has been an interesting intersection. Prior to COVID, for the most part, baby boomers make up a large part of public company boards. And pre-COVID, if you were to say to a number of these baby boomers that you're going to get on a Zoom or a Google Meet or a Teams meeting with somebody for half an hour, and that half an hour is going to profoundly help you understand how diverse candidates could be part of your board, for example, they would have been somewhat uncomfortable potentially because they're just not the digital natives. But with COVID, everybody has had to become comfortable with and also open up their eyes to this new paradigm, this new digital paradigm of how we cultivate social capital. Because right now you can't sit in a poker room together. You can't, well, you can go golfing, but there are other ways that we physically would be building the social capital that's no longer possible right now. And more people are starting to understand how they can build those relationships, how they can take just even a short period of time to connect and find a meaningful way of being able to collaborate towards a common goal. And in our case, what we're doing, of course, is by building the high performance boardroom for organizations all around the world.
I like that a lot.
Just to drill down on not-for-profit boards, it's one thing for somebody to look at a not-for-profit board as a stepping stone towards other board seats. And I'm also writing a book right now called Dear Chairwoman, where we're interviewing women board members about their journey to the boardroom and also about being on the board and the things that they're coming across. And what we're doing is we're turning those interviews into letters as if they were writing to the women of tomorrow. And one thing that I've heard from a number of these women who currently serve on public company board or private company is that they also try to devote time to be on a not-for-profit board because it just helps round out their intent to be of service. And that comes back to when you reach out to people, it's also about you being choosy about who it is that you invite to be on the board, because you want people that want to do this because they want to be of service ultimately. And ideally, if it's somebody that has a background and experience that you're looking for, then great. And I think not-for-profit boards have not done the industry in general a great deal of service, speaking of service, in that there's also this notion that not-for-profit boards only try to get board members so that there would be a give-get and that these board members would be donating money to the not-for-profit, which if they're interested in being of service and they want to be able to help the cause of what the not-for-profit is fighting for, then it makes a lot of sense. But if the person is just looking to be on the board to get to the next step of getting on a private company or public company board, then that's probably the wrong why. I mean, this always comes back to why. Simon Sinek has a great piece that I recommend all your listeners here to check out. If you Google Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K, and look up why, he does a great piece of really understanding why, which translates across personal, community, and at the enterprise and organizational level.
I've not heard of a platform like what you're doing, and it just sounds incredibly innovative. Is anyone else doing anything like this?
Not as far as we can tell. The closest competitor to what we're doing is called Lunch Club, which I admire and really love what they're doing. They're backed also by Andreessen Horowitz, which is one of the leading VCs in the industry. They are also looking to help individuals cultivate social capital through what were previously lunch meetings. I believe they've moved completely on digital now. However, they're not looking at it through the same lens as we are. We are very focused on the corporate boardroom. And so I think it's a little bit of a different angle, but that would be the closest competitor. There are other organizations that are doing great things to help the networking part and connecting people, but it's not as turnkey as I believe we have it due to the platform that we're building to support it.
So one could say then, which ties into your favorite quote, is that there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And it sounds like board seat meat, the idea has finally arrived.
Yes, similar to the notion that you don't try to chip away on a stone to make a shape, you chip away on a stone and let the shape emerge, right? So it's the same similar concept of what we're doing is we're not trying to create something out of this space. We're letting what needs to come into the space emerge through the energy and focus that we're putting into it with the board seat meat team.
The time has arrived. Well, let's shift gears a little bit away from your really interesting business model and let's talk about fun stuff. What was your favorite food travel memory?
That has got to be hands down the tasting room in Stellenbosch, South Africa.
I have been there. I know it well.
Extraordinary. Look, until that point, I have, through various people that I've known and travel, et cetera, of my own, had the chance to be in Michelin star restaurants, have had epic tasting menus of different scale and size. And the reason why the Stellenbosch tasting room just stands out so much in my mind is because of the exquisitely unique ingredients that they use that are indigenous to the region, but are significantly harder to find in other parts of the world. And also, as I'm sure this is part of what you promote, is that food isn't just about the thing that you put into your mouth and taste and enjoy and digest. It's also a combination of the atmosphere and a company, of course. And I think that the tasting room was unlike anything I'd ever come across in terms of its level of intimacy and the level of very specific care and curation that they did to integrate local flavors and whimsical ways of describing the dish that they had. And of course, the punchline to this whole thing was when the bill came, I just fell out of my chair because it was a fraction of what I was expecting due to what I had come to expect based on my other moments of indulging in sincerely culinarily extraordinary delights. And of course, I'm not underscoring this to say, go to Stellenbosch, the tasting room, because it's cheap, because it's going to be expensive for you to get there to begin with. So ultimately, the investment is still going to be there, but nonetheless, it's still, and of course, this was on the heels of being in the tasting rooms of the different wines of the Stellenbosch region. So all in all, it was a beautiful way to end the day of just indulging in and experiencing quite a remarkable landscape and scenery of people, wine, stories, and a miraculously inspiring dinner.
When you were in South Africa, did you happen to visit Balthazar in Cape Town?
No.
That was another really interesting restaurant concept, and we use it as an example, as a case study in our training. The way they have organized the menu and matching the South African meats and wines together, and how they get foreigners used to the South African meats like kudu and the different wines that they feature as well. Really interesting case study. I recommend it to everybody if they ever get a chance to go there. Really fascinating.
All right, on my next trip out to South Africa, if we can ever get on these long haul flights again, I'll check it out.
Where's your next big trip then once COVID is over?
It will probably be to go back to Japan. My father is born in 1932. He's 88 years old. And so we have some precious moments we still need to relish with my father. So I will try to get back out there once some of this craziness subsides.
You know, I've never been to Japan, and a couple of bloggers I know really well were in Osaka and they were traveling around and they couldn't stop raving about it enough. They just said it was an amazing culinary experience.
I keep forgetting you haven't been to Japan, and I think that that should be your next destination for sure. There's no comparison when it comes to the culinary experience in Japan for a number of reasons, and specifically the major cities where you have access to foods from all around the world, but also the rural areas where you're going to have incredible opportunities to have local foods and culinary experiences there. But with regards to the urban culinary scene of Japan, number one, you can pull up to one of these rinky-dink ramen stalls, literally on the side of the street, under a bridge in Shibuya, for example, and get a piping hot bowl of ramen, and you would swear that this should be written up in a Michelin star guide. And it's hard to explain it without experiencing it, like everything with food. And some people say it's attributed to the Japanese maniacal attention to detail, the maniacal attention to cleanliness, clean water, clean ingredients, high quality. The fact that you can get chicken sashimi in Japan should speak to the level of confidence and exaction that the Japanese have with respect to the quality of their food and the grade of the food and to the grade of the meat and the vegetables and everything else that's involved in a dish.
Yeah, I saw one of these television shows about food in Osaka specifically, and it just blew me away. They're the really high intensity coals that they cook on that get up to a couple thousand degrees. You know the ones I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It just looked amazing. Okay, Rika, as we wrap up, I'd like to ask you one last question, and it's bringing it back to the whole food tourism subject and the situation we find ourselves in today, now, still in the middle of the COVID pandemic, how this is affecting, well, more than affecting, it's decimating culinary cultures. Restaurants are being forced out of business, small manufacturers are being forced out of business, pubs are closing. What can we do now, and where do you think we need to be focusing our energy right now to try and come out of this with our heads above water?
The impact that COVID-19 has been having on the food and tourism industry also extrapolates across aspects of business. People used to travel to different parts of the world for business meetings because nothing quite replaces people being in the room together and having a discussion or a negotiation. And I think that this situation that we're in, where people are having to adopt and adapt to a new way of interacting with each other, and this, I already talked about this as it relates to how you build social capital with other people, is to think about what you can do with the power of technology and a lot of creative advances that are happening with that to at least achieve the same goals. And of course, nothing can quite replace the Stellenbosch experience that I had at the Stellenbosch, the tasting room. However, what I can do is, in whatever way possible, still appreciate the culture and the environment of Stellenbosch or Franschhoek right next door through a lot of the different ways that people are exposing culture and background, music, dance, etc., about a region through the digital forum. And to some extent, this is also why people are starting to become very bullish about VR, which is an arena and an industry and a technology that I've also have some experience in, where the next best thing is really having an immersive experience for different, otherwise physical experiences through the visual realm. And so as we think about the way that even at a local level, restaurants are being massively impacted, is to think about, could there be a model where there could be pop-ups, especially with restaurants in many parts of the US at least, and I think different parts of the world, where they're permitting dine-in, if as long as you're outside, is can we have some sort of industry that is homegrown and starts to emerge, where it's pop-up dining that is specifically focused on a specific region from a different part of the world. Especially with how much of a melting pot the US is, you can imagine that there have to be deep pockets of specific communities and ethnic backgrounds that would be able to inform and enrich that kind of experience, where if you can have a pop-up restaurant, it's not just about the food, it's also about the wine or other beverage that's indigenous to that region, and also have that experience be embellished by music, by musicians, by dance, by a performance, or something that really helps diners who come in, at least in this period that we're in, understand and appreciate a specific culture or specific region, still being able to enjoy the dishes from that particular region, but have that within the context of a much broader cultural tapestry that helps people open their eyes to things that are different. And what I was saying earlier about VR, and outside of the dining environment as well, is being able to open your eyes up to what other regions are like, what other peoples are like, the stories and the experiences. And in some ways, even though there are so many things that are happening around the world, especially with the virus creating these lockdown, shutdown situations, and also just a political climate sometimes creating a divisiveness that makes that much harder to do, even if we were able to travel and connect in that way, is to in turn leverage some of the ways that technology has accelerated to bring that diversity and enjoyment of food and tourism within your own home or within your own neighborhood or within your own community. And once you've experienced those things, is to then share and inspire other people to want to have a piece of that or to get that exposure and that enjoyment as well. And at some point, when we are able to travel again, there'll at least be a balance of people being able to have that enjoyment, because perhaps there's going to be a whole cohort or whole group of people that wouldn't be able to travel anyway, or currently can't, or haven't been able to because of their economic situation. But then we've created an industry, we've created an avenue by which we can bring some of that food and tourism goodness to closer shores, and something that can be more immediate and much more tangible than it's ever been before.
That is sage advice, Rika. Thank you. That's really fantastic insight. And I think it's great coming from someone who's not working directly in our industry. You still have a perspective on food and tourism and culinary culture, but not working in our industry. I think it's great because it's even more impactful what you have to say. Rika, thanks so much for your time today. It was great to reconnect with you and listen to your words of wisdom. I forgot how much I really enjoy our conversations and the kind of tete-a-tete that we have when we get together. So thank you again for taking the time. And perhaps I'll see you in Japan one day and you can give me my own food tour.
I'll cook for you. How about that?
Oh, that sounds great. Thanks, Rika.
You're welcome. Thank you, Eric. It's such a pleasure to be here. Good luck for you and your team with everything. And let us know how Board Seat Meat can help you with your board member search.
Will do. Thank you, Rika. Thanks for listening today. The Eat Well, Travel Better podcast is brought to you by the World Food Travel Association, the world's leading authority on food and beverage tourism. Our mission is to preserve and promote culinary cultures through hospitality and travel. By doing so, we empower local communities and entrepreneurs with the knowledge and tools needed to reach new food lovers and gain a competitive edge. Founded in 2003, now each year we shepherd a community of 200,000 professionals in more than 100 countries. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram, and you can learn more about us, subscribe to our newsletter, and join our family at worldfoodtravel.org. Until next time, eat well and travel better.